Hi, this is ProACT Sam from Living and Working Abroad. You can access our Facebook page or our blog at proactpartnership.com, where we discuss issues for family and business living and working abroad. And today I want to give an update and an opinion on the latest news this week on EU Brexit for expats. The summit this week in Austria was supposed to be a prelude for the EU leaders to meet up with the UK and to agree a framework towards creating an agreeable withdrawal treaty for the October summit of leaders, with the hope that certainly by November a withdrawal treaty could be ratified, to which and allow for an orderly exit with the withdrawal treaty next year. The large parts of the withdrawal treaty have already been agreed. The bits that haven't been agreed are to do with trade, essentially, and some borders. Now, there's a number of issues of land borders with the UK in the EU where there could be issues. There's a land border between Gibraltar and Spain. There's a land border between Cyprus and the British forces' sovereign base in Cyprus, but that's not an issue. But there's a land border in the island of Ireland between the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland. And there's great history on that. There's great history. And Ireland was originally 4 kingdoms, and one of those kingdoms was Northern Ireland, and that's been reduced from 8 counties down to 6, which is the region of Northern Ireland at the moment, but that is part of the United Kingdom. So when you've got a negotiation, the EU have got their red lines and the UK have got the UK have got their red lines, and you need to have a reciprocal agreement. You need to have something you can both agree on. And as we've been saying in our vlogs and in our correspondence, the problem is that the EU is not a country. It's an organisation. It's a trade body with aspirations, and its rule-based executive cannot negotiate trade agreements, customs agreements with a member state. Now, it shouldn't be beyond the wit of man for negotiators to find a reciprocal agreement that would allow them to put something new in force the day after Brexit, which is set for the 29th of March. That Article 50 has been invoked means, under EU law, that the UK must leave the EU. They can fudge it by extending it, they could fudge it by having a transition treaty, but the whole purpose of the transition treaty was to give the EU rules time to negotiate a new agreement for the UK. But they can't agree what the basis of that will be, and therefore they can't agree on what the trade will be the day after the UK have left the EU. Because once the UK is not in the EU, even though the laws in England and Wales are exactly the same as the EU after the 29th of March, the EU is worried about the integrity of their agreement. They don't want the UK to cherry pick. They won't negotiate an agreement before then. And so Theresa May went to them with a reciprocal treaty, which 24 hours later the EU roundly rejected out of hand, saying that it was completely unacceptable for Theresa May's way to be workable. And this is largely down to the UK border. Now, this is quite interesting. Let's look at the history of Ireland. There was never any border in Ireland. There was Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, but there was never any border. My family farm was in Ireland. There was on the border, right on the border, and there was no hard border. There was free movement to walk, drive, or work across the borders. People even had land that straddled the two countries. So this issue of a border has only come up where the EU has got in the way. When the euro came out, UK chose not to join the euro project. They did that because they understood that as the fifth largest economy in the world, they needed the freedom of an independent currency that could rise or fall with exchange rates depending upon the state of the local economy, to protect jobs, to protect prices, to control inflation. By going into the EU, all the economies, all the countries of the EU have to align their economies to be in one way. Now, the Ireland voted not to join the EU, and the EU's approach to that was not to accept the referendum in Ireland that said we will not join the euro. It was to lobby, negotiate, force a second referendum at which the Irish were browbeaten into saying let's join the euro. And as a consequence, Ireland, Cyprus, Greece, Italy, Spain all have economic difficulties, that because they haven't got an independent currency, they have a currency that is strengthened by the trading power of Germany, then they have continued to wallow in recession and debt and struggle, while internally to the EU, Germany has a trade surplus. And this is Donald Trump's point about the unfair trade of Germany. He's not quite turned his attention to that yet, but this is maybe something that will come. And economies like Italy, Greece and Cyprus and Spain and Ireland could have recovered much better with a free-floating economy. But the EU negotiated, hassled, aggravated, pushed for a second referendum in order to get a vote to get their way. And that's what the Irish did. They joined the euro, and good luck to them. Now, part of their negotiating stance, of course, is to do that. They don't want the British to leave the EU, but the negotiating stance is to try and force a position where a second referendum is required, or where the UK will adopt a different approach. The EU clearly and manifestly want the UK to stay within the EEA environment, which is outside the EU, but operating under EU rules. How can a sovereign country work within a trade agreement over which it's got no controls, and which the very purpose of Brexit, if you're anti-Brexit, that's okay, but the very purpose of Brexit is to give back the sovereign powers to the British government. So the EU want the British to go into the EE arrangement, and then everything is okay. And then secondly, they want an open border in Northern Ireland. But the way they want that is with Great Britain being one country and Northern Ireland being a separate country inside the EU, inside the EU's trading zone. Well, the British position now is we respect the EU, we respect your rules, we've come to you with a third way to negotiate to find a way, but you must respect the United Kingdom. That includes Northern Ireland, and we won't be negotiating away part of the sovereign country that is the UK, and we won't be subjecting ourselves to the EU rules which have been rejected by the referendum. And the UK Prime Minister has said very, very clearly that she's not going to go back to the EU with any other negotiations. The EU must now make a counter-offer, put forward a negotiated position, but that does not involve the UK having another referendum, and it doesn't involve the UK giving up any sovereignty or any rights to Northern Ireland. And that loggerhead position a month before the critical summit could mean we create the environment for a reciprocal agreement and everybody to come together, or it could mean that Theresa May, the British government, quickly moved towards a position of cementing a no trade agreement and to operate under the world trade rules. That will be absolutely fine, and then the UK can progress from there. If the EU won't negotiate before they leave the EU, they can negotiate after that. So how is that going to affect EU expats living in the UK or UK expats living in Europe? Very, very simply, the world will change. If your company in the EU or in the UK deals with any country outside the EU, then you're used to dealing with companies and countries under World Trade Organization rules. There may be bilateral treaties in place. Have a look at what they are, and this will be the way forward. The EU has a common set of trading standards for all 27 member states, but that is their set of rules for dealing with the rest of the world. There's no reason why the UK can't have bilateral treaties with every other country in the world itself. That's something to put in place, but it's something that existed before. They need one with the EU is possible, but that comes after negotiation. And if the EU's position is that has to take time, it has to take time. If the reciprocal agreement is that the EU cannot negotiate with the UK until after the 30th of March next year, then the UK will leave the EU without a withdrawal treaty. That means no transition treaty. So an EU business looking to do business in the UK must look at what the UK rules are when the UK deals with the rest of the world, or set up a branch in the UK, or the UK company could set up a branch in the EU. UK companies at an advantage because they only need to set up one branch in one EU country to have access to the whole of the EU. So if a UK company sets up a trading operation based in, say, Cyprus, using a Cyprus company or international trust, that holding company arrangement could then trade with the whole of the EU. There's similar sorts of structures available through Malta or Luxembourg. But any country, a British company doesn't have to set up trading rules with every EU country because the rules are the same across the 27. The problem is there's one agreement that's needed between the EU and the UK. The only problem is when that agreement is made. There's World Trade Organizations that allows trade to carry on. It'll be different, but the world will carry on and it'll be no different. So companies in the EU and in the UK that want to trade cross borders can do that now by looking at what the situation could be. For individuals, there's some very, very, very good news. For EU expats living and working in the UK, and for UK expats living and working in Europe, there's already agreement to maintain the reciprocal rights and the access that people have got, to maintain a very flexible right to settle there permanently or get a permanent residency. And UK expats in Cyprus can already get this, and EU expats were able to get it in the UK from March next year. And again, this week, the British Prime Minister has reinforced that any EU expat living and working in the UK before Brexit will be allowed to stay in the UK and continue to work and will, with the same rights and the same conditions as they enjoyed as an EU citizen. The UK has got the same laws and rules of the EU. They will have on Brexit Day on the 29th of March 2019, and those rights will be respected, and the EU citizens will be able to remain in the UK living and working there. So any EU expat who's got aspirations to live and work in the UK should consider commencing working there now in order to attain their settled status. If you want to know more, we produced a guide of how EU Brexit will affect expats, overseas business, property and pensions. So go along to our website at proactpartnership.com and you can download a copy of that and follow our blogs. And we'd love to hear from you. So if you've got any comments or questions, you can leave those on our website, join our mailing list, or leave a comment or question on our Facebook page.